This Monday, the temperature in Barrie dropped 20 below 0 degrees. It was extremely cold. But for many Barrie residents facing housing crisis, there was not enough warming places as coffee shops and restaurants were closed due to recent lockdown measures. And social distancing made access to other non-profit warming places difficult. The problems were made worse by the city's emergency policy that allowed the warming facilities to open only if the temperature or wind chill drops 30 degrees below zero. There were two amendments passed this week to provide more warming facilities and reduce the temperature requirement to 20 degrees below zero. Ward 6 Councillor Natalie Harris put forward the amendment to provide a one-time grant of $20,000 to the John Howard Society of Simcoe, Muskoka. The grant will be used to create additional warming capacity in the city. The Simcoe County is asked to match the equal amount of funding. However, the city's proposed funding is not dependent on counties matching it. Councillor Natalie Harris talked about the need for additional fund due to lockdowns and decrease in temperature.
So the amendment is that a one-time grant of $20,000 funded from the reinvestment reserve be provided to the John Howard Society of Simcoe, Muskoka to fund an additional overnight warming capacity in the city of Barrie, and that the County of Simcoe be requested to match this funding.
Okay, so we have an amendment from Councillor Natalie Harris to provide a one-time $20,000 grant to JHS, John Howard Society, for additional overnight warming capacity. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Harris?
Yes, and I won't take too long. I know people are pretty aware of what's going on in our downtown right now with respect to our unhoused that are looking for a warm place to go. So I did make a couple little notes that I'm just going to read because it will make it faster, actually. So the pandemic has changed the way we need to help our unhoused. And a perfect example was the report that we just heard, that we're looking at commercial parking lots and thinking, how can we change this and make this into something different? So we really must pivot, and we have to adapt. And when we have identified gaps in our services, which I think this has happened this year for sure, we need to pivot and change the way we provide shelter, housing, and warmth. And I've separated the word warmth because it is separate. So shelters for people, this is an important definition for people that are watching to understand. So our amazing shelter systems are funded through the County of Simcoe, and they provide many things. So they provide beds and peer support, food, harm reduction information, a connection to resources, so many things. And we're very grateful for that. But there are times when individuals can't, for one reason, access the shelter system. And right now that is true, especially with COVID, with restrictions with the health unit, et cetera. And because our things such as coffee shops are closed. So somebody who may not want to go to the shelter system because there's an intake, there's a process that might have to be involved, and they just really wanted to get out of the cold, could go into our Tim Hortons or whatever and try to get warm. Last year, that was our bus terminal. And this year we are opening the bus terminal with extreme temperatures if we can staff it. But we need something that is for sure. We need something now in our city that going forward, and I know that this is a temporary funding and we can have lots more discussion about that later, but we've identified a gap. There's people that are out on the street that simply have no place, especially at nighttime, to be warm. And the John Howard Society has been working since the end of November, and they have found 40 to 50 volunteers. Councillor Morales is amazing. He reached out to all of the downtown businesses through the BIA and said, we are in search of security employees to be able to provide discreet security at this location. And Ty Jones came back and said, yes, right away. So they're pretty much ready to operate this. But we need to be very, very clear. It's literally a place to be warm. So they open the door and they go inside and they sit down. Maybe there's a coffee, maybe there's not, but it's a warm place with a staff member. So this funding would cover the staffing of one John Howard or a position to be able to be there every single night until March, and also to provide salaries or wages for the security employees who right now don't have jobs. So that's a really great opportunity for them. So that is kind of what we have on the floor right now. And some people, there are many reasons why a person might not even want to go to a shelter, but the shelter systems are amazing. But sometimes I think what we're seeing right now with the attention in the media is that's not necessarily even what someone on our streets wants. They sometimes just want to go somewhere to get warm for a little while. And maybe they have plans for the rest of their night to do something or whatever. So we have to look at that. That's the reality right now, that there's nowhere to really go at nighttime.
Ward 6 Councillor Robert Thompson wanted to know what 40,000 will accomplish and the breakdown of the grant. He said the initiative should have been taken earlier and the winter will almost be over, as it will take at least 3 weeks for the money to get to the John Howard Society. Councillor Thompson also wanted to know if the city will be exposed to any liability if the John Howard Society faces legal issues with their service.
To the mover of the motion, if the 20,000 and then the ask from the county, is the 40,000 the required amount to accomplish? And in the amendment, I didn't see a breakdown of the actual money. So 2 questions: will there be a breakdown of the money by next week? And second, is there actually a facility that we're speaking of?
Yeah, that's both really great questions. So we can absolutely get that breakdown for sure. The 40,000, it was increased into the 40,000 range to include the salary for the security employees. So, but we can get the hard facts for you, absolutely. And there are 2 locations right now. One is very confidential, but there is, and this is just literally from yesterday and today, and one other location, which was the Cornerstone to Recovery location that will be the Women's Treatment Center. They have a house on the property, and the John Howard Society is making the contacts necessary to do the fire code inspections, and it's very small, so it wouldn't be able to facilitate probably more than 4 to 6 people, but it's something. So that is, we looked at the house today, myself, Susanna from the John Howard. So, and it seems like it will work, hopefully, in the one portion of the building. So fingers crossed.
If we approve this tonight, we ratify it next week, it goes to the county council, they decide whether to match. We're talking 3 to 4 weeks. We're into almost February. Is there, like, I'm actually floored. I've had a few conversations, and I don't even understand how we're at this stage with the amount of money spent on these services. Like, it's the guy who tells you he hasn't bought nothing and it's Christmas Eve. Winter was coming this year, 100%. Like, this isn't a new season. And to bring it to council, it just, and I understand that it was downloaded and warming centers aren't part of the human services, but the 20,000 you're asking for, and then 20 from the county. Well, the residents of Barrie already give the 25% of that 20,000. So it's like, we always seem to be on our lap. And look, I am 100% supportive of this. I know that the county and Mr. Bishop and Ms. Peddle have been working, and I know they were dealing with fire, and it's my understanding that by Wednesday, a Mulcaster will be opened. So it's moving quick. It seems to be, we're in the second week of January, and just one question: if we provide a grant, and maybe this isn't for the mover, Councillor Harris, maybe this would be more for Ms. Peters. Does, heaven forbid anything happened does this make the city liable in any way, shape, or form by allocating funds to it?
So if we can get Ms. Peters into the call, I guess the question is does the city somehow become liable if we are funding a service, or Mr. Mills, if we are funding a service and the service provider is targeted with a legal action, is the city also at legal risk?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson. Yeah, I do think we would have some liability exposure anytime we're participating in an arrangement with another party. So generally, we try to minimize that liability by entering into an agreement whereby another party takes on it.
Perfect. Just a follow up. If that was the case, then if the money was conditional of the match by the county and us giving a grant to the county and then the entire sum coming from the county, would that remove our liability?
Through you, Mayor Lehman and Councillor Thompson, it may minimize our liability, but I don't think it would remove it, no.
Can I ask a follow-up, Rob? Sorry, Councillor Thompson, I'm just going to jump in because this is a very interesting point. So the County of Simcoe funds a huge number of different organizations within its human services mandate, several dozen. Technically, the city contributes to a lot of those. So I guess my question is, in practice though, Mr. Mills, are you aware of legal action against the city that's resulted from that? Are we named in any actions as a consequence of our funding of a county service which is then funded to a service provider?
Mayor Lehman, not off the top of my head, no, I'm not aware of an existing action.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen one. But I mean, unfortunately, lawyers who launch lawsuits are sometimes creative in who they include in suits. I don't mean to make light of it, but I'm certainly aware that often anybody that is believed to be involved in any capacity can be at some risk. I'm just saying, I guess, Councillor Thompson, for what it's worth, I'm not aware of the city being named in a legal action because we were one of the funders of a county service, for what it's worth. So you may be onto something there as opposed to a direct grant, but you know, the complexity of that could I guess add some time. Anyway, back to you, Councillor Thompson, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate that. Yeah, I would think that it would eliminate the liability by going through, because we fund every service the county offers. So we would be named in everything. And that's, I was just looking, look, I'll be honest, I'm disappointed we're at this point, and I know the hard work. I was on the phone with somebody who was down there on the weekend with the removal of the temporary, which, you know, for all intents and purposes was, you know, something that had to be done. And it's sad that it had to come to that. But I just, like I said, I'm supportive of it, but I would just like to see it flow through the county and be conditional of that, and with them having a little bit of oversight to remove the liability of.
Ward 8 Councillor Jim Harris asked about the current arrangements to provide shelter and warming centers. City General Manager of Community and Corporate Services, Don McAlpin, and Natalie Harris provided more clarity on why the funding is asked in the middle of the winter and not at the beginning of it.
You know, obviously this is an important issue, and I'm sure all of us have heard from residents about the concerns about our folks who are experiencing homelessness and the weather that we're experiencing as well. And I just wondered to maybe build some confidence in our community. Obviously, as Councillor Thompson mentioned, it's not the first cold winter in Barrie, and we've had service providers for many years providing services to those citizens. And maybe, I don't, it's Ms. McAlpine who is our connection to the Last Stand Homelessness. If that's correct, maybe a question, Mayor Lehman, through you to the appropriate staff, if it's Ms. McAlpine, just to give us some insight into what's been the conversations at SCADA related to shelters, warming centers, and out of the cold efforts this winter. And we've got to this place where we are recognizing that there's individuals looking to have something to augment what's currently offered. But I wonder if you can give us a sense, just even for our community sense and confidence, that there is a great deal of efforts that are being put forward. And even in tonight, knowing that the warming center is operational at the bus terminal. So I just want to know if you could give us a bit of a briefing on what's being offered with relation to this issue.
The city is not directly a member of SCADA. The county is, as the service provider. In terms of city staff, there may be members of council who attend their meetings, but city staff are not directly involved in it. I can advise that, yes, as you've mentioned, the transit terminal has been made available and is made available under our emergency plan when an extreme cold alert is announced for the area by Environment Canada. And the Environment Canada definition is when the temperature or wind chill is expected to reach minus 30 degrees for at least 2 hours. There are other, as Councillor Natalie Harris indicated, there are various options that are available in different services. There's the traditional sheltering system, there are respite beds, which are sleeping beds, and then there are warming centers, which are warming only and not necessarily sleeping spaces. Traditionally, those warming spaces have been provided by community organizations. What has happened with the pandemic is the volume of people who are seeking those spaces has increased, and there are greater challenges in providing those spaces given health restrictions and, frankly, staffing in a COVID environment. So those are all factors that are there, and it looks like Councillor Natalie Harris wanted to say something as well.
No, thank you. That was a really great answer. Thank you, Ms. McAlpine. I'll also highlight a little bit of information for maybe people that are watching with respect to the churches. So there are 2 churches that have offered to provide some days of the week, and there is the delay for that is because of linked to COVID, they needed special insurance permission, and they also needed permission from the diocese. So this is, I agree. Why are we here right now? Why is this happening so late? Learning that the bus terminal wasn't going to be an every night warming center like it was last year, at first wasn't as much, even though we started talking about it as soon as I heard it end of November, but we could still have coffee shops. We still had places where people would go. So this is really kind of turned on a dime where that just doesn't happen anymore. So those people were sheltering in that gazebo because they're literally at nighttime, it wasn't even open. So they had nowhere to go if it wasn't minus 30, but at least after the night they could go there and warm up to the best of their ability. But that's kind of the conversations behind the scenes have been happening since late November. And I agree, like, how has this gotten to this position? When I reached out to Greg Bishop, again, I think it was late November, early December, and brought this to his attention, he just said, like, let's try to get the services that do receive funding from the county to collaborate with services that don't, and see if we can, for lack of better words, stretch the dollars a little bit more. But how? The dollars are stretched. The shelters and all of the services that are funded by the County of Simcoe are highly run as well by volunteers. How many more times are we going to ask for volunteers to give up their time? And this would be at night. And there's already 40 to 50 people that are on the list ready to volunteer. But I think we need to see that the conversation needs to continue. And I'm happy that Councillor Kungle put her thing on the agenda tonight to have that conversation with the county, because times are changing. We can't look at this the same way. This has really been brought to our attention this year, but I can promise you it is not for lack of effort that we're here tonight. But and we also had one location come forward about a month ago with a potential warming center, and it didn't pass the fire code. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, appreciate all the challenge that are aligned with this. To your point, I agree. The resources are limited and services are often, and I remember when Out of the Cold was born in Barrie, it was run by volunteers. The churches, several churches stepped up, and it became an incredibly successful operation and helped a lot of people. So yeah, the power of volunteering in our faith community are clearly, and it's good to hear they're already stepping up again. So, but what I wondered about was, and I know we had a memo from staff just around 88 Mulcaster opening, or is open, I think is what I read, is open from 8 to 3 p.m. for warming. In the sense of trying to consolidate and coordinate and cooperate to meet this need. And I know that you mentioned there was 2 other sites. Just curious why the extension. They're saying they're open from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., guessing resources, but they may have volunteers able to open overnight if needed. Is that that's not part of the options? And if you could explain maybe why we're not pursuing a collaboration and a consistent site, and if you could give me any insight, that would be helpful. Thank you.
It's again a bit complicated, but the services, so John Howard Society and the Gilbert Center did reach out to Busby, and the reply that they got in over time was they were open to collaboration, but it would be that those services would come and help them there. And to be honest, I'm going to be straight up right here. And this is no offense to Busby in any way, shape, or form. There are individuals on our street that don't want to go somewhere that is related to the shelter system. So 88 Mulcaster is that, and they will perceive it as that. So a different building with just an open door where they can go in and get warm, especially at night. So this would cover the night shift. This would cover what Busby is maybe struggling to be able to staff because their dollars are stretched so thin. So this is a gap that is the minimum, I think, that we can do for these individuals at this time, because there's nowhere else to go. And how much, like, the collaboration is wonderful. There were stipulations involved in the collaboration effort. And it wasn't easy. It was quite complex, which is understandable. The best way forward is to just allow the services that the John Howard Society teamed up with the Gilbert Center has already collaborated and gotten those resources available for this warming center, wherever it will be. And then they still support each other by providing, if you would like to go to the shelter, okay, we'll give you that information. Again, there isn't any kind of coaching or anything that happens in a warming center, but there of course is going to be conversations that happen that share the information that there are other services available. And the other thing I wanted to say was a lot of, again, this is very much COVID related, and it's sad, but we're unfortunately going to see more unhoused people on our streets than less in the near future, with businesses closing, with the cost of rent, with all the things. We're going to start to see familiar faces on the street. And you know, we can't wait anymore for collaboration, etc. And it can be anybody. And when a person is newly unhoused, like, imagine yourself in those shoes. You're newly unhoused. The first thing you're not looking for necessarily is even how to navigate the shelter system. It might be that you need somewhere warm to go tonight. And then that's the first step, maybe to go to a respite bed. And then that's the next step to maybe go to wherever our other services are as well. A lot of our unhoused people are very young. They're teenagers. They're and Youth Haven does amazing work, but they're usually always full. they are so stretched for dollars as well. And those individuals that are younger are kind of fearful to going to the shelter as well. It's unfortunately, even though how welcoming we can make the shelter service and how supportive and caring in the original moments of being unhoused, that isn't the first place that you go to. People look for a couch to sleep on, a car to sleep in. Maybe they're sleeping in their car for some time. If they can get out of their car and go into the warming center just to warm up for a little bit, that is kind of where we're at with people that are newly unhoused. So that's kind of a new gap where COVID has really exposed.
After a prolonged discussion, Mayor Jeff Lehman felt the need to sum up the amendment and the reason for funding. He said it is not a huge amount given the cold weather and COVID-19 crisis.
Simplify it though. I think Councillor Harris is asking a general committee to commit $20,000 to create additional warming capacity overnight in the downtown at a time when that capacity has to be provided differently because of the severity of the Omicron variant. It's very dangerous for the homeless population to be gathered at all because so many have underlying health conditions. So it's got to be done safely. It's got to be distanced. You literally need more floor area to do that than normal. The respite beds are a good solution, and they have not been full, and they have been able to provide people with overnight warming, which is in an individual bed and safe, therefore. But that's up at the travel lodge, at the hotel. So I think if we can simplify this discussion maybe a little bit, I think what Councillor Harris is bringing forward is, we know that with the closure of coffee shops and other potential places to stay warm overnight, with the fact that there are some individuals who won't go into the shelter system or can't go into the shelter system, there is a need for the warming capacity. And notwithstanding, what does exist, I think has kept people from being out in the cold overnight. There are still some gaps in terms of 24/7 throughout the winter, and in terms of a certain number of people. I think it's a fairly small number, but a certain number of people who can't access the other supports. So I would suggest to you it's a modest amount of money in an extraordinary circumstance. I think Councillor Thompson and others are quite right to say, hang on a minute though, isn't this pointing out some problems with our system? Yeah, COVID has pointed out a whole bunch of frailties in our social service net, in our regulatory net, in society in general, I think. And I think this is the latest example. And I do think it's a bit urgent. So I think, Rob, you've got a very good point. We don't want to do something that, it's not going to work for another 3 or 4 weeks, especially when the need is now. So I guess I would urge General Committee to keep it simple and provide the funding. I understand I'd never take any amount of grant money lightly, but I would urge you that the demand is now and to me fairly obvious, and it is related to the truly once in a this is the first time this has ever happened in terms of the need to distance and completely change the way the service delivery is there. Hopefully won't be the need in the future, but we'll also have hopefully better and additional capacity in the future and more time to plan it.
Councillor Thompson still wanted to provide the funding through the county to avoid any liability. The motion was passed unanimously.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Natalie Harris, for continuing to work on this. We talked an awful lot over the last 48 hours, including when you were down there at Dunlop and Mulcaster, and I appreciate your relentlessness on this since late November.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Ward 2 Councillor Keenan Aylwin proposed the second amendment to lower the temperature requirement for emergency services to kick it from -30 degrees to -20 degrees. London, Ontario has done the similar changes.
And I do have an amendment that's been circulated to members of council as paragraph 8. So I'll move that now. And it's to add a paragraph that the city open a warming only facility when an extreme cold weather alert is issued by Environment Canada, where the temperature or wind chill is expected to reach -20 degrees Celsius for at least 2 hours. And I can speak to that.
Sure. So it is an amendment from Councillor Aylwin, and it would, so currently our criteria is only when there's an extreme cold weather alert from Environment Canada, and this would change that criteria to -20, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
So first, I wanted to echo the thanks to Councillor Harris for all the work she's put in on this important issue. You're right, Mayor Lehman. She's relentless, and it's inspiring to see. It's awesome, actually. And I think thanks is also owed to the John Howard Society, Busby Center, Gilbert Center, all the social service and housing providers who have been talking about this issue and working to find solutions. Christine Naylor from Ryan's Hope has been pushing very hard as well. Blueberry Moon, a local business downtown, has been spreading the word and helping out as much as they can. So I just wanted to make sure they all know that they're appreciated for the work that they're doing. So this amendment is to recognize that the city's current policy is when there's an extreme weather warning in place, which means -30 degrees Celsius, that's when our emergency plan kicks into gear and we create that warming only facility. The issue with that is that -30 is really, really, really cold, and there's a need when it's a bit warmer than that at -20 degrees. Health Canada says that -27 degrees Celsius is the temperature where you really start to have to worry about windburn and frostbite. So I think if we're going to follow the science on that, then -20 makes sense. And that will be fulfilling our obligation to our residents that they can be safe in extreme cold temperatures. So I'm hoping that we can support that and fill another one of those gaps in the system.
Motion. Is there any other municipality that's lowered the Environment Canada?
Yes, I believe the City of London uses -20 as their threshold as well.
And this would be just to open up a city facility in an emergency?
Correct. So like what's happening tonight, the transit terminal is open as a warming center tonight only because Environment Canada issued an extreme weather alert. And so it would be that same operation, but for when it's -20 instead of just -30.
So with Councillor Natalie Harris's motion and the money, have we not kind of solved that problem of there will be a 24-hour warming center opened all the time downtown? So the terminal is used in an emergency situation right now because we don't have one, but I thought we just, kind of filled that gap. So, and to be honest, we've had some challenges in the terminal. So I think by removing it from the terminal for our workforce and the challenges that we have had, that maybe it's, like I said, we've supported it and we've given grant funding. So I think if we didn't give the grant funding, then I might have been more in line to support it. But I think with the original motion that we've kind of filled the gap. I'm not going to say we've solved the problem, but.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I thank you for raising that. I think the difference here is that this is a policy change looking at years in the future as well. So that's one piece. The funding for John Howard is just looking at this year. And secondly, I would argue that because of the reasons we've discussed tonight around needing more space to facilitate physical distancing, this is certainly something that can be used to help with those issues. And this is something that we provide as an emergency service. This is something we've provided for a number of years. So I think just making sure that service we provide is evidence-based and actually is there when there's a significant safety risk to people being outside is key. And I think, the difference between last year and this year with the transit terminal specifically, we're back to using it just as an emergency warming facility and not as a 24/7 all winter long facility. That's where we really saw the issues start to arise, was when it was that 24-hour facility. And that's not what this amendment is proposing. It's to keep it as that emergency triggered by the negative 28 degrees Celsius in the forecast. And I think that'll help with some of the concerns from the facility staff and the transit staff at the terminal.
His amendment was passed with support for all councillors except Robert Thompson. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Goodbye.